want to say I knew before I knew. That some deep mammalian wire fired in my chest before the first bark ever left Cora's throat. But that would be a lie, and I promised myself. Somewhere around day 11, when I stopped trying to find a radio station that still carried a human voice, that if I ever told this story, I'd tell the version that actually happened. So here is what actually happened. It was a Tuesday in October, the kind of dry autumn afternoon where the Missouri Ozarks smell like dust and hickory and nothing urgent. I was in the whelping barn running a weight check on a litter of 8-week-old German shepherds. 6 pups, all spoken for, deposits already cleared. 3 going to a search and rescue outfit in Joplin. 2 to a police K-9 program in Springfield. 1 to a private client in Tulsa who wanted a family protection dog and was willing to wait for my bloodline. My name is Ruth Carden. I've been breeding and training working dogs for 19 years on 40 acres 7 miles outside of Harlow, Missouri. Population 411, if you counted the gas station. My operation was small but clean. 4 adult females, 2 stud males, a retired female named Bix, who mostly slept on a horse blanket near the wood stove, and whatever pups were in rotation. I had a training yard, a whelping barn, 2 kennel runs, and an old dairy barn I'd converted into an equipment shed. No employees. 1 part-time helper, a 17-year-old homeschool kid named Eli Sumner, who came 3 afternoons a week and had a feel for the dogs that I trusted more than most adults I'd worked with. Eli was due at 3. It was 2:47. Cora started it. Cora was my best female. Czech line working dog, 4 years old, nerves like surgical steel. I'd seen her hold a tracking line through a thunderstorm that sent 2 other dogs into kennel panic. She did not bark at nothing. She did not bark at deer, at coyotes, at the mail truck, at the FedEx driver who always slammed his door too hard. When Cora barked, something was there. She was in the outdoor run closest to the east tree line when she stopped mid-stride, turned her head 45 degrees, and locked. Ears full forward, tail frozen at 10 o'clock. The posture wasn't aggression. It wasn't prey drive. It was something I'd only seen a handful of times in 2 decades. A full orient. The kind of deep neurological attention that working dog trainers call a hard lock. Everything in the dog focuses on one coordinate. Every system subordinated to input. Then she barked. Not her alert bark, not her demand bark. A sound I'd never heard her make, a low, repeating, guttural vocalization that carried no information I could decode. Just signal, just alarm without object. Within 30 seconds, every dog on the property was doing it. Gunner and Asco, the 2 males, hit the fence lines of their runs and matched Cora's orientation exactly east-northeast, toward a stand of post oaks that bordered the old Lindner parcel. 100 acres of unmanaged timber that hadn't been touched since Harold Lindner died in 2019. The 3 pups old enough to be in the outdoor socialization pen started howling, which pups that age do not do. Bix, 13-year-old Bix, who hadn't raised her voice in 2 years, stood up from her blanket in the barn doorway and added a sound that wasn't a bark and wasn't a howl, and made the hair on my forearms stand straight. I set down my clipboard. I walked to the east fence and looked where they were looking. Nothing. Post oaks, leaf litter, a rusted strand of Lindner's old barbed wire sagging between 2 T-posts, a drainage ditch with about an inch of standing water from last week's rain. No movement. No scent I could detect. No sound except the dogs behind me, united in a chorus aimed at a fixed point in empty timber. I pulled my phone and called Eli. "You on your way?" "Leaving in 5. What's up?" Dogs are acting off, all of them, at the same time. Off how? Oriented east. Full lock, vocalizing in unison. I can't source it. A pause. Eli had been around dogs long enough to hear what I was actually saying. I'll leave now, he said. I want to say I was scared. I wasn't. Not yet. I was puzzled, which for me was worse, because puzzled meant my primary instrument for reading the world, the dogs, was producing data I couldn't interpret. For 19 years, the dogs had been my translators. They read the things I couldn't, and I read them. That circuit had never failed. It was failing now. Eli arrived at 3:02, pulling his mother's Dodge up the gravel drive faster than he usually did. He left the door open and walked straight to the east fence line without being told. The dogs were still going. 14 minutes of sustained, unified vocalization. I had never seen anything like it. Working dogs rotate attention. They fatigue. They check in with the handler. These dogs were locked like they'd been nailed to a bearing. "What's out there?" Eli asked. "Nothing I can see." He climbed the fence. Long legs, easy motion, and walked 30 yards into the timber. I watched him scan the ground, the canopy, the drainage line. He came back shaking his head. No tracks, no scat, no carcass, no scent pool I can find. Ground's dry enough I'd see prints. I know. Ruth? Cora's drooling. I looked. He was right. A long rope of saliva hung from Cora's lower jaw, which meant her sympathetic nervous system was fully activated. Fight or flight, over nothing visible. "Could be subsonic," I said. "Seismic, maybe. Gas line rupture somewhere underground. We're not that far from the pipeline easement. Want me to call it in?" "Not yet. Let me check USGS." I pulled up the earthquake monitoring page on my phone. No activity within 200 miles. I checked the gas company's outage map. Clean. I checked weather radar. Clear skies in every direction. I even pulled up the military flight schedule out of Fort Leonard Wood. Sometimes low-altitude runs hit infrasound frequencies that dogs could register. Nothing scheduled. At 3:18, the dogs stopped. Not gradually, not one by one. Every animal on the property fell silent in the same half-second, as if someone had pulled a plug from a socket. Cora sat. Gunner lay down. Asko turned away from the fence and walked to his water bucket. The pups went back to tumbling over each other. Bix lowered herself onto her blanket with a grunt and put her chin on her paws. Eli and I looked at each other. "That's worse," he said. He was right. A dog that alerts and then resolves. That means the stimulus has passed. A dog that alerts at maximum intensity and then shuts off with no gradient. That means something else. That means the dog has made a decision about the stimulus that doesn't include you. I checked every animal individually over the next hour. Vitals normal, appetites normal, no tremoring, no panting, no avoidance behavior. Whatever had happened, the dogs had processed it and filed it somewhere I couldn't access. Eli stayed until 5, helped me feed, and left with a look that said he'd be checking his phone tonight. I did my evening routine, fed the pups their second meal, cleaned the runs, locked the whelping barn, brought Bix inside because the nights were getting cold and she'd earned every square inch of couch she wanted. I made soup. I ate it standing at the kitchen window, looking east at the tree line, turning black against the last light. At 8:40, my neighbor Darlene Fossey called. Darlene ran a small goat operation on the adjacent parcel to the south. We weren't friends exactly. She thought dog breeders were a half step above puppy mills, regardless of operation quality. And I thought goat people were constitutionally incapable of maintaining a fence. But we had the Rural Neighbors Treaty of Mutual Awareness. She called when my dogs were loud. I called when her goats were on my road. "Your dogs were going for a while today," she said. not complaining, noting. I know, I couldn't find a source. Huh. My goats bunched around 2:30. Wouldn't leave the corner of the barn paddock closest to the road. I practically had to drag the buck in for feeding. East corner? A pause. How'd you know? My dogs were oriented the same direction. A longer pause. Darlene was not a dramatic woman. She had weathered 2 divorces, a barn fire, and a bout with lymphoma with approximately the same level of vocal inflection. So when she said what she said next, the flatness of her voice made it land harder. Ruth, the crickets stopped. I went to my porch. I stood in the dark and listened. She was right. Mid-October in the Ozarks, you should hear a full insect chorus at night. Crickets, katydids, the last of the cicadas winding down for the season. I should have heard frogs from the creek bed 200 yards north. I should have heard at least one owl from the Lindner timber. I heard nothing. Not silence. The absence of everything that should have filled it. Like the land had been muted from underneath. How long? I asked Darlene. Noticed about 20 minutes ago. Went out to do a final goat check and it just wasn't there. Stay inside tonight. You going to tell me why? I don't have a why. Just stay inside. I locked my doors. I checked my rifle. A Remington 700 I kept in the hall closet, more for coyote deterrence than anything I'd ever needed it for. I brought all the dogs I could fit into the house, Cora, Gunner, and Bix. The others stayed in the barn kennel with the doors secured. None of the dogs objected. None of them settled either. They lay in the living room in a loose triangle formation, heads up, eyes open, oriented in 3 different directions, and did not sleep. Neither did I. By morning, I had a theory, and no way to prove it. The theory was simple. Something in or near the Lindner timber was producing a stimulus that animals could detect and humans could not. And that stimulus was either suppressing or displacing normal fauna behavior in a spreading radius. The dogs had detected it first because they were closest and because their sensory range dwarfed mine. The goats had bunched because herd animals consolidate when threatened. The insects and frogs had gone silent because that's what small prey species do when a predator enters the ecosystem. They go quiet and they wait. The problem was that I couldn't identify the predator. I drove into Harlow at 7:30 to get feed and diesel. Main Street was 4 blocks of single-story storefronts built in the 1940s, half of them empty, the rest operating on stubbornness and local need. Cal Brecker was opening the hardware store. Marianne Potts was unlocking the diner. Tommy Landis was sitting on the bench outside the post office with a coffee cup and a look of permanent residency. I stopped at Marianne's for coffee because I needed caffeine and because Marianne heard everything within a 20-mile radius before it became official. Anything strange last night? I asked her. Marianne poured without looking up. Define strange. Animal behavior. Silence. Anything people are talking about. Glenn Huber called the sheriff about his cattle. Said they wouldn't leave the barn yesterday afternoon. Wouldn't go out this morning either. Said in 30 years of ranching, he's never seen a whole herd refuse pasture. Glenn Huber's ranch was 3 miles northeast of my property, on the other side of the Lindner timber. Anyone else? Patty Wells said her cats disappeared. All 4 of them. Monday afternoon, just gone. And Rick Bonner said his bird dogs won't hunt. Took them out to the conservation land yesterday evening, and they sat in the truck bed and wouldn't unload. Rick's pretty sore about it. I drank my coffee. I didn't say what I was thinking, which was that a circle was forming. My property, Darlene's goats, Glenn's cattle, Patty's cats, Rick's bird dogs, all within a 5-mile radius of the Lindner timber, all starting Tuesday afternoon. Marianne, you hear anything last night? Outside, I mean. Night sounds. She thought about it. Now that you mention it, no. I let the kitchen cat out around 10, and it was quiet as a church. I remember thinking it felt early for Frost's silence, but I didn't dwell on it. I paid for my coffee and drove to Glenn Huber's. Glenn was standing at his barn door looking at 40 head of black Angus, who were packed into a structure built for 20. The smell was significant. The cattle were stressed. Wide eyes, rapid breathing, manure everywhere. They had not eaten despite full hay racks. "They won't go," Glenn said. He wasn't asking me to fix it. He was just stating a fact to another person who worked with animals, hoping to be told something that made sense. When did it start? Tuesday, around 3. You hear anything unusual? See anything? Not a damn thing. That's what's got me sideways. There's no cause, no predator signs, no tracks, nothing on the game cameras. I've got 8 cameras on the property, and every one of them shows the same thing. Nothing. Nothing at all. He looked at me. That's what I mean, Ruth. Nothing. Not even a rabbit. Not even a mouse. 8 cameras Tuesday night through this morning. 0 triggers. Like every living thing in the timber just packed up and left. I drove home on back roads and watched the tree lines. 2 miles from my property, I rolled down the window and listened. No bird song. It was 8:15 on an October morning in heavy timber. I should have heard jays, woodpeckers, crows at minimum. The Ozarks always had crows. I stopped the truck and stood in the road for 3 full minutes. Wind in leaves, my own breathing, the tick of the cooling engine. That was all. I called the Missouri Department of Conservation at 9. Got a field officer named Linda Chen, who listened to my report with the patient skepticism of someone who fields calls from rural landowners about strange animal behavior 3 times a week and has learned that the cause is almost always a gas leak, a dead deer, or imagination. "Ma'am, I can put in a request for a wildlife survey, but we're looking at a 2 to 3 week turnaround unless there's evidence of a disease event or contamination. There are no animals left to survey. That's what I'm telling you. Every species within what I estimate to be a 3 to 5 mile radius has either relocated, gone silent, or is refusing to leave shelter. And you've checked for chemical spills, gas leaks. I've checked everything I can check from a civilian position. I'm asking you to send someone with equipment." "I understand. I'll flag the report as priority and see what we can do." She wouldn't do anything. I knew it while she was still talking. I had no dead animals, no visible contamination, no footage of anything. I had an absence, and absences don't generate urgency in people who aren't standing inside them. Eli showed up at noon without being asked. He'd been monitoring the local Facebook groups and had a list on his phone. Marge Kiefer's chickens stopped laying as of yesterday. Dean Pollock's hounds are under his porch and won't come out. The Benson kid's rabbit died, just dropped dead in its hutch. No marks, no sickness, and... He scrolled down. Somebody posted in the Harlow community page asking if anyone else's well water tasted different. 3 people said yes. Who's the well water person? Connie Radcliffe. She's on Route P about 1.5 miles east. East. Toward the Lindner timber. Everything was east. Eli, I need you to help me with something, and I need you to not think I've lost my mind. He waited. I want to map this. Every reported anomaly, every behavior change, every silence zone, plotted on a topo map with timestamps. I want to see if there's a center, and I want to see if it's spreading. He didn't blink. I brought my laptop. By 2 o'clock, we had a map taped to my kitchen table. A USGS topographic sheet of the Harlow quadrangle with colored pins pushed into it. Red for animal behavior changes, blue for silence reports, green for the single data point about water taste. The pins formed a rough circle with a radius of approximately 4 miles, centered on the Lindner timber, specifically on the old Lindner homestead, a collapsed farmhouse and root cellar that sat in a hollow about a mile into the woods. "You ever been to the Lindner place?" I asked Eli. "Once, with my dad before he left. We were hunting mushrooms. It's just a ruin. Foundation, some walls, a cellar hole full of water." "Anything else out there?" "Caves, sinkholes, old mines. There's the quarry." I knew the quarry. An abandoned limestone operation from the 1950s, flooded since before I moved here. It sat about a half-mile past the Lindner homestead, deeper into the timber, on land that technically belonged to the county now. "Ruth." Eli's voice had changed. He was standing at the kitchen window. "Look at the dogs." I went to the window. Cora, Gunner, and Asko were in the east run. All three were lying flat on the ground, not resting, but pressed down, chins on the concrete, bodies flush against the surface, like they were trying to reduce their profile, like they were hiding from something above them. "They've been doing that for about 10 minutes, Eli said. I didn't want to say anything until I was sure. Sure of what? That it wasn't going to stop. It didn't stop. For the rest of the afternoon, every dog on the property maintained the same posture. Flat, low, oriented east. Silent. Not asleep. Not distressed in any way I could measure with a thermometer or a stethoscope. Just pressed against the earth, as if gravity had delivered an instruction that superseded me. At 4:15, my phone rang. "Darlene. Ruth, 2 of my goats are dead." I drove over. She met me at the barn door with a face I hadn't seen on her before. Not grief, not fear, something closer to bewilderment weaponized. 2 Nubian does lay in the barn aisle, side by side, with no visible injury, no bloating, no foam. They looked like they'd simply stopped. Found them an hour ago. They were fine at morning feed. I called Doc Whalen and he's coming tomorrow, but Ruth, they're not sick. You can see that. They're just dead. I knelt beside the closer doe and pressed my hand against her barrel. Still warm. No rigor yet. I checked her eyes, her gums, her hooves. Nothing. The others? Bunched in the corner. Same corner as yesterday. They won't eat. I stood up. "Darlene, I think you should pack a bag and come to my place tonight." "Why?" There it was. The question I couldn't answer. I had no pathogen to name. No predator to describe. No contamination report to reference. I had a map with pins in it, and dogs that were lying flat, and a neighbor's livestock dying of nothing, and a silence that was spreading across the hills like a stain soaking through cloth. "Because the animals are telling us to leave," I said. "And I've spent 19 years learning to believe them when they do." Darlene didn't come. She said she'd be fine. She had a shotgun and a bolt on the door, and she wasn't going to abandon her herd over a feeling. I understood. I had nothing to give her except intuition dressed up as urgency. And Darlene was the kind of woman who required something she could see before she'd alter her plans. That night, I sat on my porch with the Remington across my knees and tried to catalog what the silence actually sounded like when it reached you. Because it had reached me now. Not just the absence of insects and frogs. That had been true since Tuesday night. But now, the wind itself seemed dampened. Not gone. Still there in the trees, still moving the branches. But the sound it made was thinner, like it was arriving through a narrower channel, like the air had less capacity to carry things. Cora was beside me on the porch. She'd stopped lying flat around sundown, and had moved into a posture I'd never seen from her, sitting upright, rigid, facing east, with her mouth slightly open. Not panting, tasting the air, running it over her vomeronasal organ in a continuous chemical read that I couldn't access. "What is it, girl?" I said. She didn't look at me. In 19 years of working with dogs, I had never spoken to one and received so complete a non-response. Not defiance, not distraction, dismissal. As if my question existed on a frequency she was no longer monitoring. That scared me more than the silence. At 11, I called the Taney County Sheriff's non-emergency line and asked if there had been any unusual reports from the Harlow area. The dispatcher, a young man who sounded like he was trying to stay awake, said there had been a few animal welfare calls but nothing actionable. I asked if they could send a deputy to check the Lindner property and the old quarry. "Ma'am, is there a specific crime or emergency to report?" "No, I'm reporting a pattern of..." "I can log it as a welfare concern and have someone check it out when there's availability. Probably Thursday or Friday." Thursday or Friday. 3 days from now. I thanked him and hung up. At midnight, I went inside and tried to sleep. The dogs were arrayed through the house in positions they'd chosen themselves. Cora by the front door, Gunner by the back. Bix in the hallway between the bedrooms. Asco at the foot of my bed. Sentries. They had posted sentries without being told. I lay in the dark and listened to the nothing outside my walls and thought about the last 19 years. About the first litter I'd whelped alone, in a rented house in Nixa with newspaper on the kitchen floor and no idea what I was doing. About the first dog I'd trained to track. A big red male named Kestrel who taught me more about reading terrain than any human instructor ever had. About the quiet accretion of a life built on the premise that animals perceive what we cannot, and that the proper human response is not to explain, but to listen. The dogs were telling me something I couldn't hear. I was going to have to decide whether to follow them without understanding. At 2 in the morning, I heard something. Or rather, I felt something. A low vibration in the floor, in the bed frame, in my chest. Not sound exactly, pressure. Like a bass note below the threshold of hearing, sustained and directionless. Asco lifted his head at the foot of the bed. His ears were fully forward. Then he lowered his head again and closed his eyes. He'd heard it, acknowledged it, and decided there was nothing to do. Wednesday morning. Dawn was gray and windless. I went outside to feed and found that the 3 pups in the socialization pen had dug a hole under the fence and were gone. Not escaped in the usual puppy way. Chasing a squirrel, following a scent, testing boundaries. Gone in a specific direction. The hole was on the west side of the pen. They had dug toward the road, away from the Lindner timber. The tracks in the soft ground were clustered and purposeful. 3 sets of puppy paws heading west at what looked like a run. 8-week-old puppies do not run west in coordinated groups at dawn. I got in my truck and drove the road. Found them 1.5 miles from the property, huddled under a culvert, shaking. When I approached, they came to me immediately, desperate, licking, whining. Glad to see a human, glad to be collected. But when I loaded them in the truck and turned back toward the property, all 3 tried to climb into the front seat, away from the direction we were heading. I brought them home. I put them in an interior kennel in the barn with extra bedding and a stuffed Kong and latched the door. They didn't touch the food. They didn't play. They pressed themselves against the western wall of the kennel and stayed there. Eli arrived at 10. He'd been up since 6, he said. Couldn't sleep. His mother's dog, a 14-year-old lab mix that never left its bed, had walked to the front door at 4 in the morning and scratched until she let it out. It walked to the truck, sat beside the driver's door, and refused to come back in. "Facing which direction?" I asked. "West. Mom's house is east of here." "Eli, I'm going to the Lindner place." He didn't argue. He didn't offer to come, which told me something about what his instincts were saying. "Take your phone. Keep it on. Cell service is spotty out there." "I know. Take it anyway." I geared up. Boots, brush pants, the Remington, a day pack with water, and a first aid kit. I considered bringing Cora. In any other circumstance, she'd be my first choice for a recon into unknown terrain. I looked at her in the East Run, still rigid, still oriented, still tasting air that carried information I couldn't access. I left her behind. Whatever she was reading out there, I didn't want to walk her into its source. I crossed my east fence at 10:30 and entered the Lindner timber alone. The first thing I noticed was the temperature. Not colder, flatter, like the air had lost its texture. In a healthy October forest, you feel microclimates constantly. Cool in the hollows, warm on the ridges, damp near water, dry on exposed rock. This felt homogenized. One temperature everywhere, like the inside of a room. The second thing was the color. The leaves were still on the trees, oaks and hickories in full autumn dress, reds and golds. But they looked faded, not dying, not browning prematurely. Faded, as if the pigment had been thinned, as if something had drawn a percentage of the color out of the canopy, the way you drain a saturated photograph. The third thing was the sound of my own footsteps. Too loud. Not because the forest was quiet. I'd known it would be quiet. But because each step sounded like it was being returned to me, reflected off a surface I couldn't see. Not an echo, a repetition, like the ground was handing my sounds back slightly louder than I'd made them. I followed the old logging road toward the Lindner homestead. 40 minutes of walking through timber that looked right and felt wrong. No animal sign, no tracks in the soft places, no scat, no feathers, no browse marks on the low growth. The forest was structurally intact and biologically vacant. A theater with every set piece in place and no cast. The Lindner homestead sat in a shallow hollow at the convergence of two seasonal drainages. The house was gone, collapsed into its own foundation years ago. Just a rectangle of mossy stone with saplings growing through it. The root cellar was a darker rectangle behind it, its stone-arched entrance half blocked by a fallen oak limb. I stopped at the edge of the hollow and listened with everything I had, and heard my own heartbeat. Not felt it, heard it, coming from outside my body. A rhythmic, wet, double thump audible in the air around me, as if the hollow were a stethoscope held against my chest. My heart broadcast into the silence, filling the space the birds and the insects had vacated. I turned around and walked back. I did not run. I wanted to. I did not. By Wednesday evening, the circle had tightened. I knew because Mary Ann called me from the diner at 5 o'clock to say that the birds were gone from downtown Harlow. Not just songbirds. All birds. The pigeons that roosted in the old grain elevator, the starlings that massed on the power lines along Route 14, the pair of red-tailed hawks that had nested on the water tower for as long as anyone could remember. Gone. Sometime between noon and 4, every avian species within the town limits had departed. And it's quiet, Ruth. I mean quiet. I walked out back to dump the grease trap, and I couldn't hear the highway. The highway's 1.5 miles away, and I can always hear it. Always. Tonight, nothing. I pulled up Eli's map on my phone. Harlow was 4 miles from my property. Tuesday. The silence radius was centered on the Lindner timber. If it had reached Harlow, That meant the radius had expanded from roughly 4 miles to at least 8 in 2 days. Doubling. It was doubling. I called Glenn Huber. No answer. I called Darlene. No answer. I called Connie Radcliffe, the well water woman, because her number was in the Facebook post. No answer. I called Eli. How far are you right now? Home, 7 miles west. Can you hear anything outside? Night sounds? He put me on speaker. I heard him open a door. A pause. Then, distant but present crickets. A frog. An owl. Yeah, he said. Sounds normal here. Good. Stay there tonight. Ruth? I mean it. Do not come here tomorrow. Not until I call. What happened at the Lindner place? I told him. The flat air, the faded color, the returned footsteps, the heartbeat. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said something that a 17-year-old should not have had the clarity to say. But Eli was not a normal 17-year-old. The dogs knew before any of it. They knew Tuesday afternoon, and they already had their plan. Cora's not frozen. She's holding the line. The pups ran because they're too young to hold. The adults stayed because they're trying to tell you what direction to go. The pups went west. Everything that's running is going west. I stood in my kitchen looking at the map and the pins and the circle that was eating my county from the inside out. And I thought, I can leave. Right now. Load the dogs, hook up the trailer, drive west until the crickets come back, and keep going. But Darlene wasn't answering her phone. And Glenn wasn't answering. And Connie Radcliffe wasn't answering. And there were 411 people in Harlow who had no dogs to tell them what was coming. Eli, I'm going into town tomorrow morning. I'm going to try to convince whoever I can to leave. With what evidence? I don't know. They'll think you're crazy. Probably. Ruth. He paused. Don't take too long. Thursday morning, I drove to Harlow with Cora in the passenger seat. Not because I thought she'd help me convince anyone. Because I wasn't willing to leave her behind again. And because some part of me understood that she had become my compass. That wherever she oriented, the threat was. And wherever she turned away from, safety might still exist. She rode with her head below the window line. I had never seen her do that. Harlow looked normal at first glance. Cal Brecker was opening the hardware store. The flag on the post office hung limp in windless air. 2 trucks were parked at Mary Ann's diner. But the town felt like the Lindner timber had felt structurally intact and atmospherically wrong. The light was flat. The shadows were soft-edged. And the silence was total. I went to the diner. Mary Ann, Cal, Tommy Landis, and a woman named Beth Sutherland who worked at the county clerk's satellite office were sitting at the counter. They were not talking. They were drinking coffee and looking at the window and not talking. Morning, I said. 4 heads turned to me. 4 faces that looked like they'd been awake too long. Ruth, Mary Ann said, you notice anything different about town this morning? It's quiet. It's more than quiet. Listen. I listened. And then I understood what she meant. It wasn't just the absence of birds and insects and distant highway noise. It was the absence of resonance. My voice, when I'd said morning, hadn't carried the way a voice carries in a room. It had dropped, like the air was thicker, like sound was being taxed for traveling. My hearing aid's acting up, Tommy Landis said. He tapped the device behind his right ear. Getting some kind of interference, low hum. Started last night. Tommy, take it out for a second. He removed the hearing aid and held it up. We all heard it. A faint, subsonic pulse coming from the device. Not feedback, not malfunction. The hearing aid was amplifying something that existed in the air at a frequency below normal perception. Something that had been there since Tuesday, getting stronger. "How many of you have tried to call someone outside of town in the last 12 hours?" I asked. Beth raised her hand. "Tried to call my sister in Branson last night. Call went through, but she said I was cutting in and out. Said it sounded like I was calling from a tunnel." "I had the same thing," Cal said. "Called my supplier in Springfield. He could barely hear me. Asked if I was on a bad cell connection, but I was on the landline. I pulled out my phone and tried Eli. The call connected, but when he answered, his voice was thin, compressed, like it was being squeezed through a pipe. "Ruth, you sound... Can you hear me?" "Barely. Are you? Harlow?" "Yes, listen. I need you to do something. I need you to call the County Emergency Management Office and the State Highway Patrol and tell them that Harlow has a communications disruption and possible environmental contamination. Use those words. Tell them we need a hazmat team and an evacuation assessment. Tell them." The call dropped. I tried again. Couldn't connect. I looked at the 4 people at the counter. "I need everyone in this room to go home, pack a bag, and drive west, right now. Don't wait for an explanation." Mary Ann set down the coffee pot. "Ruth, you're going to have to do better than that." So I told them. The dogs, the map, the expanding radius, the Lindner homestead, the heartbeat in the hollow. I watched their faces as I spoke, and I saw the thing I dreaded. Not disbelief, which can be argued with, but the polite recalibration that happens when someone decides you've crossed from concerned to unwell. "Ruth," Cal said gently, "it's been a weird few days, no question. But what you're describing, silence spreading from the woods, some kind of, what, force field? You're talking about something that doesn't... I'm talking about what the animals already know. Every dog, every cow, every goat, every bird, every insect within this radius has either fled or died. And the radius is growing, and we're inside it. And the longer we stay, the harder it's going to be to..." I stopped, not because I chose to, because my voice stopped, mid-sentence. The word "to" left my mouth, and then there was nothing. I was still exhaling. My vocal cords were still vibrating. I could feel them, but the sound wasn't reaching the air, like it was being absorbed at the surface of my throat. I opened my mouth wider, pushed harder, got a whisper, a thin, strained remnant of my voice, like shouting into a heavy wind. Mary Ann's hand went to her own throat. "Ruth?" Her voice was intact. So was Cal's, and Tommy's, and Beth's. They were staring at me. I grabbed a napkin, grabbed a pen from my jacket pocket, wrote in block letters, "My voice is going. Yours will too. We have to leave now." I held it up and pointed west. "Here's what I need you to understand about what happened next, because it's the part that will define every remaining day of my life. I had a choice. I was standing in a diner in a dying town with a voice that was failing and a dog in my truck who had been telling me to run for 2 days. I could stay and keep trying, writing notes, grabbing arms, dragging people to their cars, and risk losing my voice entirely, risk the radius closing around me like a fist, risk becoming one more silent body in a silent town. Or I could leave. Get in my truck, collect my dogs, drive west, and survive with the knowledge that I'd tried and failed and chosen myself. I chose a middle thing, a cowardly, practical, human thing. I grabbed Mary Ann's arm and pulled her toward the door. She came, not because she believed me, but because the look on my face when my voice disappeared had done what 20 minutes of argument could not. She grabbed her keys and her purse. I pointed at Cal. He shook his head. I pointed harder. He stood up. Tommy Landis waved me off. I'm 81 years old, and I'm not running from silence, Ruth. Get going. Beth followed Cal. Outside, I scrawled on the napkin, "Follow my truck west. Don't stop until you can hear crickets." Marianne took her own car. Cal and Beth took Cal's truck. I got in mine. Cora was lying on the seat with her eyes closed, breathing shallowly, and for one horrible second, I thought she was dead. But she lifted her head when I touched her, and her eyes found mine. And in them I saw something I will never be able to describe to someone who hasn't spent a lifetime reading dogs. Not fear, not pain. Recognition. Like she'd been waiting for me to catch up. I started the engine. The radio was on. I'd left it tuned to the Springfield AM station out of habit. Static, not the jagged static of a weak signal. A dense, fibrous static, like the sound of the silence itself amplified, to where human ears could almost parse it. Almost hear the structure inside it. I turned it off. We drove west. Me in front, Marianne behind me, Cal behind her. 3 vehicles on an empty highway under a gray October sky in a pocket of silence so total that I could hear my own blood moving. 2 miles out of town, my voice came back. Thin, scratchy, like recovering from laryngitis, but present. Cora shifted in her seat. Her ears, which had been pinned flat against her skull since dawn, rotated forward, partially, testing. 5 miles out, I heard a crow. One crow, calling from a dead elm on the roadside. The most beautiful sound I have ever heard. A single harsh note that meant the world was still making noise somewhere, and we had reached the edge of the place where it wasn't. I pulled over. Marianne pulled up behind me. I got out and walked to her window. "Ruth, what the hell is happening?" Her voice was shaking. "I don't know, but we can't go back. My whole life is back there." "I know." Cal got out of his truck. Beth stayed inside, hands over her face. Cal walked to where I was standing and looked back the way we'd come. Harlow was invisible behind the hills, but the sky above it looked wrong. Not darker, not clouded, but flatter, as if the atmosphere there had less depth, like looking at a photograph of a sky instead of a sky. "How many people are still in town?" Cal asked. "Everyone," I whispered. "Everyone except us, and whoever already left on their own." He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. We regrouped at a gas station in Fordland, 20 miles west of Harlow, where the night sounds were intact, and the air had texture, and my phone had 4 bars of signal. I called Eli first. "I'm out. I have 3 people with me. Marianne Potts, Cal Brecker, Beth Sutherland. We left Tommy Landis. We left everyone else." "I called emergency management," Eli said, "and the highway patrol, and the conservation department again. Ruth, nobody's responding the way they should. Emergency management said they'd flag the report. Highway patrol said they'd check it out. I told them what you told me. Communications disruption, environmental anomaly, livestock deaths. And they said they'd send someone when available. When available? It's like the system can't hear it either. I don't mean the silence thing. I mean, the situation doesn't fit any of their categories. There's no tornado, no flood, no chemical spill they can name. They don't have a box for silence is spreading from the woods and animals are fleeing." I leaned against my truck. Cora was sitting up now, alert, watching me through the window. The first time she'd been upright and engaged with me in 2 days. "I need to get my dogs," I said. "Ruth, no. Gunner and Asko are in the runs. The pups are in the barn kennel. I left them behind. You can't go back in there. I'm not leaving my dogs." A silence that had nothing to do with the anomaly. I'll go, Eli said. Absolutely not. I'm faster than you. I know the property. And I'm 17. Which means whatever this thing does to voices and hearing, I've probably got more margin than you do. My mom's dog is still acting normal. That means I'm still outside the radius. Your place is between me and the edge. I can get in and get out before... Eli? Ruth, you trained those dogs. I know what they're worth to you. But more than that, they're the only ones who knew. If we lose them, we lose the only warning system that actually works. He was right. I hated that he was right. Take my truck, I said. It's at the house. Keys are in the visor. Load the kennel crates from the barn. Get all of them. Gunner, Asko, the 3 pups, and Bix. Bix will be in the house. She'll be slow. Carry her if you have to. How will I know if I'm going too deep? Your phone. If the signal starts degrading, you're at the edge. Turn around. And the dogs? How will I know if they're... If Gunner shows you his belly, you're out of time. Gunner doesn't submit to anything. If he rolls over, it means he's conceding to something bigger than any of us. And you need to take whoever you've got and drive. Okay. Eli, thank you. You taught me what the dogs were saying. I'm just running the errand. He hung up. I stood in the parking lot of a gas station in Fordland, Missouri, with 3 displaced townspeople and a single German shepherd, and waited. Marianne handled it by cleaning. She went into the gas station, bought paper towels and a spray bottle of all-purpose cleaner, and wiped down the table in the small seating area until it gleamed. Then she wiped down the counter. Then she started on the windows. The attendant, a young woman named Kylie who had no idea what was happening, watched her with the uncertain expression of someone who wants to be helpful but doesn't know to whom. Cal handled it by making calls. He stood outside with his phone and worked through a list. His wife, who was visiting her mother in Columbia and hadn't planned to return until Friday. His son in Kansas City, his brother in Joplin. To each of them, he said the same thing. Something's wrong in Harlow. Stay away. I'll explain when I can. His voice was steady. The steadiness was the thing that was breaking him. Beth sat in Cal's truck and didn't come out. I could see her through the window, staring at the dashboard. Occasionally, her lips moved. I thought she might be praying, but later she told me she was reciting the inventory of her office. Every file drawer, every folder, every form. Because it was the only structure she could hold in her mind that hadn't been invalidated. I sat with Cora and waited for Eli. At 4:17, my phone rang. I've got them. Eli's voice was tinny, compressed, but intelligible. All 6. Bix was in the hallway. She walked to the truck herself. Ruth, the property is... it's different. The air. I don't know how to describe it. Don't try, just drive. Gunner didn't show his belly. Good. But he got in the crate facing west, and he didn't look back. None of them looked back. He arrived at the Fordland gas station at 5:10. I heard my dogs before I saw them. A sound from the truck bed that I can only describe as reunion keening. A vocalization I'd heard mothers make when separated from pups and brought back together. Except this was all of them. Cora in my truck answered. A rising, falling, wordless sound that carried something I couldn't name but recognized in my chest the way you recognize a word in a language you spoke as a child and forgot. I opened the crates, checked each dog. Gunner licked my hand. Gunner, who had never licked a human in his life. Asko leaned against my leg with his full weight. Bix wagged her tail once, slowly, with the gravitas of an old woman nodding at something she'd always known would happen. The pups mobbed Eli's unk. Les and he let them. crouching down to gather all three against his chest while they whimpered and burrowed into him. "How was the drive?" I asked. My voice went funny about 2 miles from your place, like talking through cotton. Came back around mile 4. He stood up, a puppy under each arm, the third clinging to his boot. "Ruth, I saw something on the way out." "What?" "Darlene's place. I drove past it. The barn door was open and the goats were gone. Not in the pasture, not on the road. Just gone. And her truck was still in the driveway. I absorbed that. Filed it in the place where I was keeping the things I couldn't afford to feel yet." "What about the road? Any other traffic?" "One car. Headed west, moving fast. Didn't recognize it. Other than that, nothing. No one on the road, no one in the fields. I passed the Huber ranch, and the cattle pen was empty. Gate was closed, but the pen was empty." "Cattle don't climb fences." "I know." We stood in the parking lot as the sun dropped behind the line and the shadows pooled in the hollows east of us. And I made a decision that wasn't mine to make, but that no one else was going to make. "We're not stopping here," I said. "Fordland is 20 miles from the center. If the radius is doubling every 2 days, it reaches here by Saturday. We need to keep moving." "How far?" Mary Ann asked from the gas station doorway. She'd run out of things to clean. "I don't know. Far enough that we can hear the world working. Far enough that the dogs relax." I looked at Cora. She was standing beside my truck, facing west, ears forward, tail at a neutral carry. Alert but not alarmed. Oriented but not locked. "She's reading the distance," I said. "When she lies down and sleeps, we've gone far enough." Cal Brecker looked at me for a long moment. He was a hardware store owner who had sold me lag bolts and PVC fittings for 15 years. He had no reason to follow a dog breeder's interpretation of a German shepherd's body language into an open-ended westward evacuation. But he'd heard the silence. He'd seen the flat sky. And he'd watched me lose my voice mid-sentence and keep moving. "I need to gas up," he said. We drove in a convoy, me and Cora in front, Eli in my farm truck with the dogs, Mary Ann in her sedan, Cal and Beth in Cal's truck. We took Route 60 west toward Springfield, and the Ozarks unrolled beneath us like they always had. Wooded hills, creek valleys, small towns clinging to the highway like barnacles on a keel. But something was different about driving away from the silence. Every mile west felt like surfacing from deep water. Colors sharpened. Sounds returned in layers. First the road noise, then the wind. Then the ambient hum of a landscape still populated with living things. Somewhere past Rogersville, I heard a dog bark from a farmhouse, and I cried. Just briefly, just enough. We stopped in Springfield at a budget motel on the commercial strip off Glenstone Avenue. I got 2 rooms. The dogs went into mine, all 7 of them, which violated every pet policy ever written. But I wasn't negotiable on this point. Eli called his mother, who had driven to his aunt's place in Lebanon with the old lab mix. She was frightened and angry in the specific way that mothers of teenage boys are frightened and angry when the boy has done something brave and correct. He talked her down. She agreed to stay in Lebanon. We gathered in my room at 9. 5 humans and 7 dogs in a space designed for 2 humans and 0 dogs. Bix had claimed the bed. Nobody challenged her. "So what now?" Beth asked. It was the first thing she'd said since Harlow. "Now we tell someone," Cal said. "Police, National Guard, someone with resources." "And tell them what?" Mary Ann said. "Silence is coming. Our dogs told us. There are dead animals, dead livestock, a whole town without communication. That's concrete." "Darlene's goats are dead," I said. "The Benson rabbit is dead. Every wild animal within the radius is gone. That's a die-off event. Fish and wildlife should respond to that. Should, Eli said. I'll go in person tomorrow. The Regional Fish and Wildlife Office is here in Springfield. I'll bring the map, the timeline, the animal behavior log. I'll bring Cora if they'll let me. And if they don't listen? I looked at Eli. He was sitting on the floor with 2 puppies in his lap and one asleep against his thigh. He looked older than 17. He looked like someone whose translation of the world had been proven right in a way that no one would ever validate. Then we keep going west, I said. And we tell everyone we pass. That night, I lay on the floor because Bix had the bed, and I wasn't going to move a 13-year-old dog who'd earned her rest. Cora lay beside me. For the first time since Tuesday, she was not oriented east. She was lying on her side, her spine against my hip, breathing slowly. Not asleep. Her eyes were open, but present. Here, with me. I put my hand on her ribs and felt her heartbeat. Steady, strong, private, contained inside her body where it belonged. Good girl, I whispered. She sighed. The sigh of a working dog who has completed a task that was never trained, but always known. The Fish and Wildlife Office listened more than I expected and acted less than I needed. A field biologist named Dr. Patel took my data seriously. The map, the timeline, Eli's Facebook compilation, the behavioral logs I'd kept on each dog. He made copies. He said he would forward it to the state veterinarian's office and the EPA regional coordinator. He used the word investigation twice. He did not use the word evacuation. Ms. Carden, what you're describing is consistent with a localized environmental disturbance. Possibly geologic, possibly chemical. We'll need to get a team in to assess air quality, water samples, soil composition. These things take time. The radius is expanding. By my estimate, it's gained 4 miles in every direction since Tuesday. Your team drives into that zone. They may not be able to communicate once they're inside. He nodded, writing. We'll equip them accordingly. Dr. Patel, the animals left before anyone understood what was happening. Every species. The only warning was behavioral, and no one was watching for it. He looked at me over his glasses. I hear you, I do. But I have to work within a system that requires measurable data before it can authorize a response. You're giving me observational evidence, and I believe you. But I need instruments to confirm. I wanted to scream. I didn't. I shook his hand, gave him my number, and left. Outside, Cora was waiting in the truck with the window cracked. She watched me walk across the parking lot, and I could feel her assessment, her reading of my posture, my pace, my scent. She knew before I opened the door that it hadn't worked. Her tail moved once, a single lateral sweep. Not consolation, acknowledgement. The next 3 days existed in a strange amber. We stayed in Springfield. Eli monitored every channel he could access: social media, scanner apps, local news, ham radio forums. The silence zone was growing, and people were beginning to notice, though the stories were fragmented and disconnected. A trucker on a forum reported losing AM radio reception on a 20-mile stretch of Route 5 south of Hartville. A weather spotter in Mountain Grove posted that her instruments were registering anomalous barometric readings. Not high or low, just flat, unvarying, like the atmosphere inside the zone had stopped participating in weather. A county road crew outside of Kabul reported that their radios went dead on Highway 181 and didn't come back until they'd driven 6 miles west. But these were scattered posts on forums nobody important was reading. The major Springfield news stations ran nothing. The silence, it turned out, was not just acoustic, it was structural. The thing was invisible to every system designed to detect threats, because every such system relied on signals, and the signals inside the zone were being consumed. On Sunday, 5 days after the dogs first barked, Eli found a post from a National Guard unit that had been dispatched to investigate a communications dead zone in the Harlow area. They'd driven in from the east. Their radios had failed at the zone perimeter. They'd continued on foot for approximately 2 miles before the team leader called a retreat. His written report, leaked to a forum by someone who shouldn't have had access, contained a single line that I read 17 times. Upon entry into the affected area, all team members reported progressive difficulty producing vocal sound, culminating in total voice loss at approximately 1.5 miles from the identified center. Effect reversed upon withdrawal to the perimeter. Below this was an addendum from the unit's medic. No physiological cause identified. Laryngeal function appeared normal on exam. Effect is environmental, not medical. Recommend full NBC protocols for subsequent entry. NBC: nuclear, biological, chemical. They were reaching for categories that didn't fit because the real category didn't exist yet. That evening, Dr. Patel called me. "Ms. Carden, we sent a team in yesterday. 3 field biologists with air monitoring equipment, water sampling kits, and full PPE. And their instruments stopped functioning inside the zone. Not malfunction. The readings went to 0. Every sensor, every meter. As if there was nothing to measure. Air quality 0. Particulate count 0. Electromagnetic field 0. Not trace amounts. 0. Like the instruments were operating in a vacuum, except the team was breathing normally. Did they lose their voices? A long pause. Yes, approximately 1 mile in. Full return after withdrawal. Dr. Patel, what is the current estimated radius? Another pause. Based on our team's observations and cross-referenced with your original data, approximately 12 miles from center. Growing. Doubling every 2 days. It had been 5 days. 12 miles. Springfield was 60 miles from the Lindner timber. You have 5 more doublings before it reaches Springfield, I said. That's 10 days, maybe less if it's accelerating. Ms. Carden, I've forwarded everything to federal channels. This is above my office now. Is anyone evacuating Harlow? The silence on his end was a different kind of silence. The human kind. The kind that means someone knows the answer and wishes they didn't. We can't confirm the status of anyone still inside the zone. Communications are not possible. Tommy Landis is in there. Darlene Fossey, Glenn Huber, the Benson family, Patty Wells. 400 people. I know. I'm sorry. I wish I could tell you we saved them. I wish I could describe the convoy of emergency vehicles pouring east, the helicopters, the organized evacuation of a town that had been drowning in silence for a week. But this is the version that actually happened. And in this version, the system moved at the speed of systems. FEMA opened an investigation on day 9. The governor declared a limited state of emergency on day 11, restricted to a 40-mile radius. Already too small by the time the declaration was signed. The National Guard established a perimeter on day 13. But the perimeter had to keep moving because the zone kept growing. And every time they marked a boundary, the silence crept past it overnight, swallowing road signs and cell towers and the sound of generators powering the very equipment they'd set up to monitor it. We were long gone by then. On day 7, I woke at 4 in the morning in the Springfield motel to find every dog in the room standing. Not alarmed, not oriented. Standing, facing the door, tails low, waiting. They wanted to go. Not in panic, with patience. The way a working dog stands at the door when it knows the day's task has been loaded and the handler just hasn't given the command yet. They were packed. They were ready. They were waiting for me to say the word. I got dressed. I knocked on the other rooms. Eli was already up. His mother's lab had called her from Lebanon to say the old dog was standing at the door, same posture, same patience. She'd driven to meet us. Marianne came out with her bag in her hand. She'd slept in her clothes. "How far?" she asked. "West," I said, "until the dogs sit down." Cal and Beth had left the day before. Cal's wife had never come home from Columbia. She'd gone straight to Kansas City to their son, and Cal had followed. Beth had family in Nevada. She'd taken a bus. They were smart. They listened to the math even when the math was insane. So it was 4 of us. Me, Eli, Marianne, and Eli's mother, Karen, a quiet woman with weathered hands and a lab mix named Arthur, who had started this whole exodus by walking to a truck at 4 in the morning and facing the right direction. We drove. West through Springfield, west through Stratford and Marshfield, and on through the long roll of the Ozark Plateau toward the Kansas border. The dogs were calm, traveling calm, the settled, purposeful energy of animals, in transit who understand the destination even if the humans don't. We listened to the radio as we drove. By afternoon, the story had reached national news, though the framing was still tentative. Unusual atmospheric phenomenon. Investigation ongoing. Residents advised to avoid the affected area. No one said the word evacuate with conviction. No one said the word silence as if it were a thing that could swallow a county. Outside of Joplin, Cora lay down. She turned once on the back seat, curled into herself, tucked her nose under her tail, and closed her eyes. Within minutes, Gunnar did the same in Eli's truck. Then Arthur, then Asko, then the pups. I pulled over on the shoulder of Interstate 44 with the Kansas state line visible in the distance and the afternoon light falling gold across the prairie. And I listened. Wind in grass, a meadowlark, the hum of the highway, the breathing of a sleeping dog, the world still making its sounds. "Here," I said to Marianne, who had pulled up behind me. "For now, here." We settled in a rented farmhouse outside of Pittsburgh, Kansas, a temporary arrangement that became permanent the way most permanent things do, not by decision, but by the failure of any reason to leave. Eli enrolled in the local high school. Karen got a job at a feed store. Marianne opened a small breakfast counter in town because Marianne, without a diner, was a body without a circulatory system. I breed dogs still. Cora whelped a litter in January. 7 pups, all healthy, all spoken for. I trained them the way I always have, with one addition to the curriculum that no training manual covers and no certification body recognizes. I teach them to orient, to show me the direction of the thing I cannot hear. And I teach their handlers to watch for it. The hard lock, the unified bark, and then the silence that follows, which is not absence, but decision. The zone is still there. Still growing, last I heard, though reports are harder to come by because the agencies monitoring it have started classifying data. Harlow is inside it. Has been since the beginning. I don't know what happened to Tommy Landis, or Darlene, or Glenn, or the 400 others who stayed. I don't know if they're alive in some silent version of the town, or if they're simply gone the way the birds are gone, and the insects are gone, and the goats are gone. I don't know. And the not knowing is the shape of every morning when I open my eyes. What I know is this. I followed the dogs. When my own language failed me, when the words wouldn't come, and the systems wouldn't listen, and the evidence couldn't be produced, I followed the dogs. And they brought me here, to a place where the meadowlarks still sing and the crickets still call at night, and my voice still reaches the air when I speak. I'm not the same person I was before the silence. I'm someone who crossed over into the logic of animals and found it sufficient, and who came back to the human world carrying that crossing like a second skeleton inside the first. I speak to people. I buy groceries and pay rent and answer the phone. But part of me is always listening for the frequency beneath the frequency, the one the dogs hear first. And part of me is always ready to leave everything and follow them again, west, away, into the territory where sound still lives. Cora is on the porch right now. She's facing east, not locked, just checking. I check with her. We listen together.